No ship entered human space willingly anymore. That was the first truth they taught at the Lyceum of Strategic Memory on Orphaline Station. Not in the official texts, of course. The official texts spoke of disputed lanes, failed diplomacy, quarantine and unexplained disappearances along the Perseus Scar. But in the hushed voice of lecturers after the data walls dimmed and the academicians drifted out, the real lesson was always the same: do not cross the black line. Senior Observer Tarev Ilsorn had laughed the first time he heard it. He was of the Itari Combine, born under the pale oceans of Nar, educated among probability, engines, and legal choirs, a servant of a civilization that believed no mystery existed which could not be measured, modeled, and eventually tapped. To Tarev, human space was not a place of terror. It was a dead zone wrapped in propaganda, a frontier myth exaggerated by merchants, soldiers, and frightened border worlds. For 83 standard years, humanity had occupied a wedge of stars beyond the Perseus Scar and sealed it tighter than any empire in recorded history. No trade envoy, no migration treaties, no cultural exchange, no tribute demanded, no ambassadors offered, no expansion visible. Just a perimeter of warning buoys, autonomous defense, lattice, and a declaration repeated in every major galactic tongue. Nitrogen monoxide foreign vessel may enter human health systems. Turn away ORB, turn to dust. Absurd. Tarev had thought then a species that isolated itself, that completely was either dying or pretending not to be weak. Now, standing beneath the blue-white hololith of the frontier, as the chamber of the Concordium Council shook with shouted accusation, he was less certain. The convoy vanished in regulated transit space. Thundered Delegate Horesk of the Vorga hegemony, his plated jaws snapping around each word. Not in human space, not beyond the line, in our corridor, under our registry. That is an act of war. Across from him, the silver-veiled representative of the Kepri Synod lifted for delicate hands in ritual denial. No debris field has been authenticated. No transponder casket recovered. Your conclusion exceeds the evidence. Evidence. Hesky roared 41 freighters, 3 escorts, 6,000 crews. The chamber erupted again, voices stacking in layered translation bands. Gas breathers hissed. Chitinous limbs struck diplomatic rails. The floating scribes of the Talar Union dimmed and brightened in distress. Above them all, the star map turned slowly, and there at its center lay the black crescent. 12 systems under human control, marked only by warning glyphs and blank telemetry. Tarev watched in silence from the observer tier, crest feathers lying flat against his neck. He had not expected his first council assignment to place him this close to hysteria. The Concordium liked to imagine itself eternal. It spanned 231 member civilizations, balanced by tariff law, fleet parity, and mutual exhaustion. War still occurred. Of course, brief, surgical, deniable, but true panic was rare. Panic implied uncertainty, and uncertainty was intolerable to a structure built on prediction. Yet the room smelled of fear, not because of a missing convoy. Convoys vanished. Raiders, navigational errors, stellar anomaly space consumed the careless every cycle. No, what frightened them was patent. For 9 months, fringe outposts bordering the Scar had reported impossible sensor echoes, ghost massas where nothing should be, radio bursts in dead spectra, entire pirate enclaves going dark after boasting on open bands that they would test the human border. A reconnaissance carrier had lost 2 wings without ever recording incoming fire. A Kepri monastery station had received a single transmission from somewhere inside the sealed region. A child's voice in perfect synod liturgy, reciting a funeral prayer no human should have known. Now a convoy was gone, and the council, which had spent generations mocking humanity's had begun to circle a possibility. None of them wanted to name aloud. The Lord Chancellor's resonance chime rang once, hard enough to crack the chamber into silence. "Senior observer, Tarev Sorum," said the Chancellor, his body hidden within the amber mist of the central dais, "you will present the Itari assessment." Tarev's stomach tightened. He descended through the tiers, each step echoing far too loudly. The center platform recognized his sigil and cast his notes into the air around him. Frontier lanes, vanished vessels, probability matrices, red vectors pointing toward the sealed human wedge. He bowed in the Atari mode head, lowered, right hand to sternum. "Honored delegates," he began, voice steady because years of training made it so. "The Athari assessment remains provisional. We cannot yet attribute the disappearances conclusively to human military action." Haresk barked laughter sharp as snapped bone. Tarev continued, "However, the pattern is statistically incompatible with piracy, random malfunction, or natural stellar phenomena. The incidents clustered around a gradient extending from the human exclusion boundary. Moreover, each affected vessel transmitted one common datum before loss." He flicked a claw through the air. Audioglyphs spun open. Across the chamber came the sound. Not a weapon alarm, not an impact warning. Singing. Loachi first, as though carried through metal corridors and failing air. Then stronger many voices, disciplined, harmonic, almost unbearable. There were no words that translators could parse, only layered human tones swelling over the static. The chamber held still. Tarif let it play for 7 seconds, then cut it. "The signal appears in 17 separate loss events," he said, always within the final minute. "We estimate deliberate broadcast psychological warfare, Mataretalar. Plume cluster, its light dimming to indigo." "Or ritual," whispered the Kepri delegate. Huresk leaned forward. "Or bait." Tarev did not answer immediately, because privately, against every discipline of his profession, he had replayed that recording 46 times in his quarters. Not for data, for the feeling. There was something in those voices that numbers refused to hold. Not triumph, not bloodlust. Resolve. He hated that word. "Observer," said the Chancellor, "state your recommendation." Tarev inhaled once. Around him floated the weight of empires. "The Athari recommend a controlled reconnaissance task group under Concordium sanction. Limited incursion to the boundary and no further unless fired upon. Our objective: determine the extent of human operational reach, locate the missing convoy, and compel a formal diplomatic response." A dozen delegations protested at once. Others signaled support. The Volga slammed their approval into the record, eager for any excuse to mobilize. The Kepri hesitated. The Talar wanted distance. The trade blocks wanted their lanes reopened yesterday. The argument spiraled for an hour, and all the while, human space turned in the dark above them, quiet as a grave. By session's end, the vote had passed. Not war. Not yet. A reconnaissance and enforcement flotilla would advance to the Perseus Scar under unified Concordium banners. 1 diplomatic vessel, 6 heavy cruisers, 11 destroyers, remote sensor blooms, legal observers, deterrent posture only. Tarev was attached as lead civilian analyst. When he returned to his quarters, he found a private packet waiting in his inbox, unsigned and routed through 7 blind relays. The encryption was old, border grade, almost primitive by Combine standards. Inside was a single image, a human buoy, half buried in asteroid ice, its warning glyph scored by micrometeor impacts. Beneath the glyph, in trade, someone had painted a message by hand. We told you to stay out. Tarev stared at it for a long time. Then he opened the attached telemetry file. The data did not make sense. It showed mass shadows moving along the boundary, huge, intermittent, far larger than known human hull classes. Sometimes they appeared inside the exclusion line, sometimes beyond it, once, impossibly, directly beneath a convoy in transit without ever triggering collision alarms. Stealth that deep should have been unattainable. Mass could be hidden from ordinary scans. Yes, heat signatures could be bled. Emissions could be masked. But gravity, inertia, wake turbulence, space itself kept accounts. Unless some corner of his mind whispered they had found a way to cheat the accounting. Tarev shut the file and felt, for the first time in many years, a very ancient instinct rise beneath his polished reason. Not curiosity, dread. 3 days later, the flotilla departed Orphaline. From the observation blister of the cruiser Judicial Spear, Tarev watched the fleet emerge into the frontier dark in disciplined formation. Vorga cruisers prowled on the flanks like armored beasts. Capri sensor frigates glimmered in geometric halos. Concordium insignium blazed across every hull, bright enough to be read by anything watching. And something was watching. He knew it before the instruments confirmed it. At first, it was only absence. The border beacons ahead human warning buoys, spaced in a vast curved arcor, transmitting as expected, simple, repetitive, almost archaic bursts in multilingual code. Turn back. Do not proceed. Turn back. Then one buoy went silent, not destroyed, not jammed. Silent. Then another, and another. Across 10 million kilometers, the line of warnings began to go dark one by one, not randomly, but in sequence, as though something immense were moving behind them, extinguishing each voice with a passing shadow. The bridge officers noticed it almost together. Signal dropout on buoys 7 through 12. No debris, no weapon signature. Passive arrays are clean. Impossible, said the Vorga, tactical chief. Tarev stepped closer to the glass, feathers flaring without his consent. Beyond the bow, where stars should have shone uninterrupted, the darkness seemed wrong, not empty, layered, like a curtain drawn across the universe by a hand too large to imagine. A final buoy flickered, and instead of the standard warning, a different transmission filled the bridge, human, untranslated at first. Then the ship's systems caught up, rendering the voice into clipped, level. It was a woman speaking, calm as still water. Concordium vessels, you are approaching restricted territory. You have already crossed the first line. Do not cross the second. The Vorga Commodore bared his fangs at the tactical pit. Source unknown. Range unknown? How can it be unknown? No one answered. The voice returned. Same calm, same unnerving certainty. You believe fear built this border? It did not. Mercy did. Then the stars ahead disappeared entirely. Not dimmed, not obscured by dust, erased, blotted out by the outline of something vast sliding between the fleet and the galaxy beyond. So enormous, the bridge crew could not at first comprehend what they were seeing. The sensors screamed contradictory. Visual enhancement failed. Gravitic readouts overflowed into static. Tarev felt every feather on his body rise, because hanging in the dark ahead of them, where no ship that size should have been able to exist unseen, was the edge of a human construct bigger than a moon. And it was only the first one. For 12 full seconds, no one on the bridge of the judicial spear spoke. In military archives, in predictive simulations, in the cautionary theater reels shown to new officers, silence was never represented honestly. There was always someone shouting over alarms, always some brave fool barking impossible orders into a tactical storm. But real silence, Tarev learned then, was worse. Real silence was the moment when training shattered under the weight of the unseen, and minds across a command deck tried to force a shape onto something too large to fit inside reason. The human construct eclipsing the stars ahead was not a ship, not by any definition used within the Concordium. It had no visible drive plume, no rotating habitation rings, no running lights, no registry transponder, no heat behavior matching a conventional vessel. It was a colossal arc of black metal and faceted geometry, as though a section of fortress wall had been cut from a planet and set drifting between suns. Its surface was broken by colossal trenches, plated ridges, and tower-like extrusions buried deep within armor strata kilometers thick. Sparse lines of white light gleamed along its edges like frost over a blade, and still the instruments could not agree whether it was truly there. "Passa confirms visual mass," said Sensor Prefect Ilya of the Kepri frigate screen, her translated voice gone thin, gravimetric arrays are fluctuating. Structure appears to decouple from local inertial baseline every 9 seconds. The Vorga Commodore swore. "Speak plainly." "It is there," Ilya said, "and somehow it is not obeying momentum." That sentence seemed to hang in the recycled air like poison. Tarev stared through the blister glass at the black edge stretching farther than the bridge windows could frame. His Itari mind, trained to reduce chaos into systems, seized on details to avoid the hole. Their heat vents concealed beneath radiative shutters, their weapon apertures big enough to swallow destroyers, their markings faint beneath armor scoring in human block script, not decorative, functional. Compartment names, hazard bands, docking alignments. Human engineering always had that blunt confidence, he recalled from old records. Their machines did not ask to be understood. They simply informed you where not to stand. "Magnify Sector 14, he said. The image sharpened. Scars ran across the construct's hull in vast diagonal trenches, old enough to have been plated over and old enough again for the repair metal to weather differently. Some marks were unmistakably weapon strike. Others looked like impacts from bodies larger than ships. Along one ridge, a section of armor had peeled back sometime in the distant past, revealing an inner layer of interlocking mechanisms packed with staggering density. "Battle damage," Tarev murmured. The Commodore heard him. From whom? No one answered that either. The diplomatic vessel Candescent will moved forward to lengths, its white hull and gold emissive seals absurdly delicate against the monolithic dark by Concordium law. All first contact signaling under uncertain military posture passed through a registered envoy ship. Its emitters flared, sending identity proofs, navigation logs, legal claims, requests for recognized communication protocols. The answer came immediately. Not to the Candescent will, to every ship in the flotilla. The same woman's voice filled the bridge again, and all across formation the fleet heard her at once, bypassing encrypted channels as if Concordium security were childish. "You were warned before departure. You were warned at the line. You were warned at the second line. Your transmission has been received. Your legal claims are irrelevant here. The Vorga Commodore stepped to the central picket and spoke over an open military band. This is Commodore Drask of the Concordium Enforcement Flotilla. Identify yourself and state the nature of this structure. A pause. Then, I am Commander Elara Vance, Territorial Defense Authority, Outer Bastion Network. You are observing Bastion 3. You are within engagement geometry. Do not advance further. Drosk's shoulders rolled with insult. Under Concordium navigation statutes, no sovereign power may close an interstellar corridor without multilateral review. Under human law, we can. The bluntness of it hit the bridge harder than any threat. Drosk bared his fangs. Then human law will be revised. Commander Vance's reply was almost gentle. You mistake distance for safety, Commodore. Please do not mistake courtesy for weakness. Then the channel closed. For the next hour, the flotilla held position while every scientific and military sensor in the formation worked feverishly to understand what stood before them. The results were worse than ignorance. The Constructus Bastion appeared to be anchored to nothing. It maintained exact spatial relation to the borderline without detectable station-keeping output. Its power readings vanished whenever focused on directly, then reappeared in secondary reflections at magnitudes that implied the energy budget of a small industrial moon. Its outer armor contained alloys unlisted in any trade, theft, or espionage record held by the Concordium. Worst of all, long-range scans began to suggest Bastion 3 was not alone. At first, the analysts thought it was mere noise. Then they thought the human structure was projecting false echoes. But as the triangulation tightened, ghost forms emerged deeper in the dark beyond the line. Other massas, equally vast, placed in layered depth across the approach corridors to human space. A wall. Notarev corrected himself with a cold feeling under his sternum. A defense in depth. The Concordium had spent 80 years imagining human space as empty stars guarded by overzealous minds and paranoid patrols. Instead, humanity had been building fortresses in silence, hidden by technologies no one else had even known to seek. Whatever else humans were, they were not crouching behind their border in fear. They had been preparing. In the wardroom that cycle, the diplomatic and military leadership assembled for emergency conference. Tarif stood along the rear curve with the analysts, listening as old assumptions died one by one. The envoy, Minister Salseng of the Talara Union, floated in her chair cocoon, biolights pulsing rapid gold. If this is the visible perimeter architecture, then the total industrial output required exceeds their declared colonial capacity by a factor of 20. Tarev finished. Drusk slammed one claw on the table. Then their declarations were fraudulent. Obviously, said Salseng. A Kepri intelligence cantor leaned forward, delicate mouthparts trembling. Not merely fraudulent, systematically fraudulent. For generations, they concealed mass movement, materials, acquisition, labor allocation, energy signatures. Entire sectors must have been fabricated into ghost accounts. Impossible, snapped a trade adjudicator. Tarevi turned, unable to stop himself. Not impossible, merely expensive. All eyes shifted to him. He continued, quieter. Humanity withdrew from every major financial framework 70 years ago. At the time, we called it self-harm. We assumed they had crippled themselves by abandoning interstellar capital integration in retrospect. They removed themselves from every accounting regime that could have measured what they were building. The room went still. The Talar envoy's lights dimmed. They vanished from the books. "Yes," Tarev said, "and we mistook invisibility for decline." Drosk gave a harsh snort. "Fortresses do not win wars on their own." "No," said the Kepri cantor, "but species that build fortresses this large while pretending to be weak are rarely planning only to survive." That was when the first political fracture opened. The Vorga wanted immediate pro-Basol Satore de Bastian with drones. Force a reaction, map its firing arcs. The Talar demanded withdrawal and emergency summit before the border situation escalated into general conflict. The Kepri wanted more time, more listening, more caution. Concordium Central Command, 4 hours of transmission leg away, sent contradictory priorities veiled in procedural language. Maintain prestige, avoid open war, obtain actionable intelligence, do not suffer losses that could panic the member worlds. Prestige, Tarev thought bitterly. The empires always spoke of prestige when they had run out of control. While the admirals argued, he returned to the censor pits and requested every historical fragment ever archived on early human expansion. Most of it was fragmentary trade disputes, migration censuses, snippets from intelligence exchanges before the quarantine hardened. Humanity had entered the interstellar age later than most major species and advanced chaotically. Their politics had once been loud, fractured, almost embarrassingly public. Coalition states, corporate flotillas, military blocs, splinter republics, secession zones. Then the records narrowed, not vanished, but compressed. Human polity stopped broadcasting internal conflict. External deals ceased. Colonial registries fell silent. Border advisories multiplied. Contact attempts received standardized replies. After a while, the galaxy lost interest. Why conquer the inscrutable little primates when easier clients and enemies filled the stars? He found one of the last open speeches attributed to a human official before the silence truly fell. It was old, degraded, poorly translated from an archaic Terran tongue. The speaker had no rank listed, only the name Mara Elling and the tag emergency session, Soul Assembly. The recording showed a tired human woman at a plain podium, eyes redrimmed, jaw set with the exhaustion of someone speaking after too many funerals. We have petitioned, protested, negotiated, purchased time, surrendered lanes, paid reparations for crimes we did not commit, and buried our dead with every flag in our hands, she said. The galaxy hears humanity and sees division. Good. Let them. If the stars have decided that openness is a weakness to be exploited, then let history mark this night as the hour we learned. The clip ended there. No policy summary. No aftermath. Just that sentence, preserved by some bureaucratic accident across 8 decades of neglect. Tarev replayed it twice. Then an alarm tore through the bridge. Not weapons. Not enemy movement. A ship, a single vessel, had emerged from the dark beyond Bastion 3 on a straight approach. Narrow, gray, almost ugly in its practicality. No escorts, no formation, no energy shielding visible. It looked less like a warship than a ska wrapped in engines. Human, definitely human. It crossed the shadow of the bastion and kept coming. Identification, Drosk demanded as officers flooded back to stations. The answer came from 3 boards at once. Human Diplomatic Registry, military escort signatures, and the censor officer hesitated. Life support degraded. Heavy damage across the aft spine. multiple sealed sections. It has battle scoring older than a decade and fresh plasma trauma less than 6 hours old. The ship slowed to a halt between Bastion 3 and the Concordium formation, as if physically placing itself in the path of war. A new channel opened. This time the face appeared with a voice. Human. Female. Gray at the temples. One cheek marked by a pale burned scar. Dark uniform collar. Stripped of ornament, except for a single iron insignia. Terev did not recognize. She did not look like the architects of terror the council imagined. She looked tired. Mortal. Very, very old by battlefield standards. And when she spoke, her words landed with the weight of buried history. I am Admiral Rebecca Vale of the Sole Defensive Compact, she said. Before any of you make the worst mistake in your species' histories, there is something you were supposed to learn 80 years ago. No one on the bridge moved. Vale's gaze seemed to pass through the camera and settle on each of them in turn. We did not close our borders to keep you out. She paused. We closed them to keep something else in. And behind her damaged ship, deep in the black between the hidden bastions, something vast began to wake. The first sign was not visual. It was pressure, not the crushing kind that cracked holes or bent metal, but a subtler distortion, something that crawled through instrumentation before it reached flesh. The bridge of the judicial spear filled with cascading alerts as inertial dampeners overcompensated for fluctuations that had no source. Gravity wells trembled and vanished. Spatial coordinates jittered and reasserted. Even timekeeping sacrosanct in any fleet operation began to desynchronize by fractions of a second across systems. Temporal drift exceeding tolerance, said the navigation officer, voice tight. That's impossible, Drosk snapped. It is happening. Terev felt it then, not in his body but in his thoughts. A moment slipping sideways, a memory arriving half a second before the stimulus that should have caused it. His training screamed for logic, for calibration, for a variable he could isolate. But this wasn't noise. This was something pushing back. Behind Admiral Vayal's scarred vessel, the darkness deepened not by absence of light, but by density. As if space itself were thickening. The stars in that region did not simply vanish as they had behind Bas. They stretched, smeared into elongated lines that curved inward toward a point that had no coordinates. And from that point, something moved. Mass reading, spiking, called a Caprianalist. No dash collapsing dash. No dash both. Speak clearly, Akinash, she cried. It has no stable value. On the main display, the distortion folded in on itself like a wound closing too slowly. Then it opened again wider. A shape pressed against reality from the other side. At first, it resembled a shadow cast by nothing. Then the shadow grew edges, angles, impossible geometry that intersected itself without obeying dimension. It flickered between states, as though the universe could not decide how to render it. Tarev's breath caught, because the mind, desperate for familiarity, tried to assign it form. A limb, a spine, a mouth. None of those were correct. All vessels. Admiral Vale's voice cut across every channel, sharper now, stripped of diplomacy. You are seeing a class event breach. This is not a demonstration. This is containment failure in progress. Drosk snarled. Containment of what? Vale's eyes hardened. Of them, the distortion pulsed and something screamed. Not through air, not through comms, through everything. The sound hit Tarev like a physical force and echo without origin, layered with harmonics that did not belong to any known biology. It was vast, hungry, and utterly alien to the structure of living thought. Around the bridge, crew members recoiled, some collapsing outright as their neural translators overloaded, trying to interpret something that had no language. "Shut down translation!" Tarev shouted. Now, systems complied. The scream vanished from comprehension, but its presence remained, like pressure behind the eyes. The thing beyond the breach pushed further through, and suddenly, horrifyingly, it saw them. Every sensor spiked in unison. Not detection, not targeting. Recognition. "Impossible," whispered Ilya. "We are outside its frame of it. It is adjusting," Tarev said hoarsely. "The creature or phenomena, or whatever word might one day replace both, its impossible structure aligning, warping, translating itself into a form the local universe could partially sustain. A segment of it tore free from the distortion and entered It was enormous. Not in the way ships were enormous, with mass and measurable scale. This thing occupied space inconsistently, parts of it phasing between presence and absence. But the section that stabilized was large enough to dwarf the damaged human vessel that had placed itself between it and the Concordium fleet. Where it touched reality, space burned. Energy discharge unknown spectron shielding cannot calibrate. Gravimetric shear exceeding. The reports overlapped, panicked, incomplete. The thing moved not. Forward, not exactly. Closer. The human bastion reacted instantly. From the black arc of Bastian through lines of white light ignited along its surface, thousands of image, a firing aperture unlocking in perfect sync. There was no charging sequence, no visible buildup, just sudden, overwhelming release. Beams lanced into the void, not beams of plasma or particle streams recognizable to Concordium weapon doctrine. These were anchors, threads of focused force that struck the emerging entity and held for a fraction of a second. Then they snapped. "Structural coherence lost," cried a Vorga weapons officer. "Whatever that is, it's not interacting with the fields correctly." "Of course it isn't," Vale said, her voice cold with bitter familiarity. "You can't kill something that doesn't fully exist here." The entity surged, a portion of it elongated, slicing toward the nearest Concordium destroyer. The ship never had time to react. One moment it was their engines flaring, shields stabilizing. The next it unraveled, not exploded, not shattered. Its structure simply lost agreement with itself. Hull plating separated into geometric fragments that drifted apart in impossible trajectories. Internal compartments folded into shapes that could not exist. Crew signatures vanished mid-scream. Then nothing. Where the destroyer had been, there was only empty space. The bridge of the judicial spear erupted into chaos. Return fire. Fall back. Form defensive pattern. Drosk's voice cut through it. "Hold formation. Hold." Another segment of the entity moved, this time toward the diplomatic vessel. The Candescent will flared its shields to maximum, broadcasting emergency protocols, surrender codes, non-hostile identifiers. The thing did not care. Admiral Vale's ship surged forward. "No," Tarev breathed. The human vessel placed itself directly between the entity and the envoy. For the first time, its engines burned bright, brutal, overdriven, tearing at their own structure. It was not fast enough. Nothing that obeyed physics could have been fast enough. And yet, for a moment, it was. Tarev's mind snagged on that contradiction as the human ship reached the intercept point ahead of what its acceleration should have allowed. The entity struck it. Reality twisted. The human ship did not unravel. Instead, something else happened. its hull ignited not with fire, but with a lattice of geometric patterns that spread across its surface like a second skin. Rings of light formed around it, rotating at impossible angles. The space immediately surrounding the vessel stabilized. The entity recoiled, not in pain, in resistance. Localized anchoring field, Vale said, voice strained now. We learned how to make them stay. Just long enough. Stay. Draski, ekode, so they can bleed. From bastion trees, the weapons fired again. This time, the beams did not shatter. They struck the portion of the entity pinned by the human vessels. Till then, something changed. The creature's surface, if it could be called, that flickered violently. Sections of it lost coherence, collapsing inward. For the first time, it reacted as though the attack had meaning. The scream returned different now. Anger. The entity lashed out. The human ship took the impact. Tarev saw it happen in slow, horrifying clarity. The lattice around the vessel flared, holding, then cracking. Sections of the hull folded inward. Compartments, deep structural integrity warnings cascaded across every sensor, and still the ship held its position, maintaining the anchor. Vale's voice came again, quieter. This is why we closed the borders. Another volley from the bastion struck home. A chunk of the entity tore free, dissolving into nothing as it lost whatever tenuous grip it had on reality. It was not enough. More of it was coming through. Behind the first breach, the distortion widened. Shapes moved in the dark beyond. Multiple contacts, whispered Ilya. There are more, of course. There are, Vale said. Drosk stared at the unfolding horror, his earlier fury gone. You expect us to believe. You've been fighting this alone. Vale met his gaze through the screen. For 80 years, she said. Yes. The human ship shuddered, its anchoring field faltering. If that field collapses, Tarev said, realization hitting like a blade, the entity regains full phase instability. Correct, Vale said. And then it won't just unravel ships, she finished. It will unravel systems. Silence fell for half a heartbeat. Then Drosk roared. All ships reinforce the human vessel. Target the entity at its anchored interface. Fire everything. For once, the Concordium did not hesitate. Cruisers unleashed volleys. Destroyers fired in coordinated bursts. Kepri beams laced the void with precision strike. Vorga cannons roared with brutal force. Against any known enemy, it would have been overwhelming. Against this, it slowed the inevitable. The entity strained against the anchor, its form flickering between states faster now, adapting. The breach behind it widened further. The human bastion's weapons intensified, but Tarev saw the pattern in the data. They were losing ground. And then, through the chaos, a new signal cut in, not from Vale, from deeper within human space. A different voice. Older, rougher, carrying something far heavier than command. All bastions, prepare for protocol. Tarev felt the temperature on the bridge drop, though that was impossible. Protocol. What? Drosk demanded. Vale closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. When she opened them, there was something like grief in them. Now you'll understand, she said. The entity surged. The human ship's field collapsed, and the darkness behind the breach opened wide enough for something far, far worse to begin coming through. For a single stretched heartbeat, everything failed at once. The human vessel's anchoring lattice collapsed in a cascade of flickering geometries, each ring of stabilizing light shattering like brittle glass under stress no equation could define. The entity it had been entity was stilled, inadequate words surged forward with renewed, terrible freedom. Reality around it warped, not violently now, but with a dreadful smoothness, as though space itself had accepted its intrusion. Behind it, the breach widened. What had been a wound became an aperture. And beyond that aperture, there was movement, not one shape. Many Tarev felt his mind recoil before his training forced it back into observation. He catalogued what he could because that was what Ithari did in the face of the incomprehensible. They measured even when measurement failed. Multiple emergent masses, non-linear geometry, temporal displacement variance increasing, cross-spectrum emissions inconsistent with any known energy state, and something else. Coordination. "They're not random," he whispered. On the command deck, no one heard him. Drask was already shouting orders, voice ragged with urgency. "All vessels, full retreat vector. Break formation, get clear of the anomaly." "They'll outrun us," Ilya said, her lights flickering erratically. "They are not bound to velocity." "Then we, Commodore," Vale cut in sharply. "If you run now, they follow. If they follow, they learn. If they learn, your worlds die." The words landed like impact. Drosk froze. "What are you proposing?" he demanded. Vale didn't answer immediately. Her gaze shifted not to the Concordium fleet, but past them to something only her sensors could see. "Command has authorized ashful," she said quietly. "We hold them here." Tarev felt the implication before he understood it. Hold them here, at the border. His eyes snapped to the star map. Every major Concordium corridor ran within 2 standard jumps of the Perseus scar. If the breach expanded— "Admiral," Tarev said, stepping forward without permission. "What is protocol?" Ashful Vale looked at him directly for the first time, and in her expression there was no fear, only certainty. "It's the reason you're still alive." The first bastion moved. At first, Tarev thought it was another sensor error. The structure had been static since their arrival, an immovable wall against the void. But now, subtle shifts rippled across its massive surface. Sections rotated. Armor plates reached. Entire segments of the construct began to realign, sliding against one another with the slow inevitability of continental drift. "Mass displacement detected," said the sensor officer. "It's restructuring." "No," Tarev breathed. Chris saw it then. The bastion was not a wall. It was a mechanism. Across the dark, the ghost signatures of the other hidden bastions flared into visibility, no longer masking themselves. One by one, they revealed their true scale, their true positions. They formed a ring, not a defensive line, a containment lattice. "They're surrounding the breach," Ilya said, her voice trembling. "No," Tarev corrected again, his mind racing ahead of the data. "They already had it surrounded. We just couldn't see it." The realization hit the bridge like a physical blow. For 80 years, humanity had not been defending a border. They had been containing something inside it. The breach surged wider. Another entity began to force its way through, its structure even less stable than the first, flickering between forms too rapidly to track. The void itself seemed to protest its existence, space folding and tearing around its edges. "Second emergence confirmed," came the report, magnitude increasing. The first entity lashed outward again. A Concordium cruiser Resolute chain caught the edge of it. The ship didn't disintegrate. It inverted. Hull plates turned inward, as though pulled through themselves. Internal structures twisted into impossible configurations. The vessel collapsed into a point that should not have been able to contain its mast, then snapped back into nothing. No debris, no energy release, just absence. "Hold your fire," Vale commanded. "You're destabilizing the interface." Drosk rounded on her, fury and fear warring in his expression. "Our weapons are the only thing slowing it." "No," Vale said. "You're feeding it patterns." That silenced him. Tarev understood. "These entities," he said quickly, forcing the words through his rising dread, "they're adapting to interaction. Every attack teaches them how to exist here more efficiently." Vale nodded once. "Now you're thinking like we did." "Then how do you fight them?" Drosk demanded. "You don't," Vale said. The second entity broke through. The breach flared, and for a moment the darkness beyond was no longer empty. Tarev saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. A vast expanse of shifting forms, layered beyond perception, pressing against the boundary like a tide against fragile glass. Not individuals, not even a fleet, a presence. Hungry, curious, and now aware. The bastions activated. Across the ring, each massive construct flared with light patterns, spreading across their surfaces in synchronized cascades. Deep within their structures, something ancient and immense began to hum. Energy spike across all bastions, Ilya reported, magnitude quantifiable. "What are they doing?" Drosk demanded. Tarev answered before Vale could. "They're not attacking," he said, voice hollow with realization. "They're closing the door." Vale didn't correct him. The bastions shifted again. Sections that had seemed like armor peeled back to reveal vast internal erased structures that extended inward toward the breach, like the ribs of a colossal cage. Beams of light, no. Not light. Something denser lanced from each bastion, converging on the edges of the distortion. The effect was immediate. The breach resisted. Reality buckled. The entities within it thrashed, their forms destabilizing as the converging fields forced them into a narrower state of existence. The scream returned louder, angrier, layered with something new. Fear. "They're being forced into a stable phase," Tarev said, his voice barely audible. "Reduced to something the universe can contain, and something we can hurt," Vale added. "Then why didn't you do this immediately?" Drosk demanded. Vale's expression darkened. "Because once we start," she said, "we don't get to stop." The human vessel surged forward again. What remained of it? Whole integrity was gone across half its structure. Entire sections were vented to vacuum. Engines burned unevenly. One cluster completely offline, and still it accelerated toward the heart of the breach. "Admiral, your ship," Tarev began, "is already dead," Vale said calmly. "This just decides how it dies." The bastion beams tightened. The breach began to shrink. Slowly, painfully, the entities fought it. The first one, still partially anchored by the residual field from Vale's ship, twisted violently, its form collapsing and reforming as the converging forces pinned it into a more rigid state. For the first time, it looked smaller, still enormous, still impossible, but limited. "Target that one," Vale ordered. "All human batteries." From the bastion, a second wave of weapons fire erupted, different from before. Focused, precise, no longer trying to anchor, but to destroy. The beams struck. And this Chimi, the entity broke? Not completely, not cleanly, but pieces of it sheared away, dissolving into nothing as their connection to whatever lay beyond was severed. The scream fractured. Hope flared on the bridge. "It's working," someone said. Then the second entity struck. It didn't attack the bastions. It attacked the process. The converging beams flickered as the entity distorted the very space they passed through. Angles shifted. Distances warped. The carefully constructed containment lattice began to destabilize. "Field integrity dropping!" Ilya cried. "Reinforce!" Vale snapped. "We can't!" Drosk shouted. "We don't have the power." Vale's ship reached the center of the breach. Tarev's eyes widened. "No," he said. "No, you can't." Vale looked at him again, and for a moment, across species, across fear, across the vast gulf of everything they did not understand about each other, he understood her. "We tried running," she said softly. "Once." Her hand moved off-screen. "Didn't work." The damaged human vessel flared with light brighter than before, brighter than anything Tarev had ever seen a ship produce. The Bastia network reacted instantly. "Energy routing from Bastion 3 to the human vessel," Ilya reported, stunned. "And from 4-5 all of them." "They're feeding it," Tarev realized. "Feeding it what?" Drosk demanded. "Everything." Vale's voice came one last time. "Tell your people," she said. "We weren't hiding. The ship's core went critical." Not in any way, Concordium science recognized. Space around it folded inward, collapsing toward a singular point that burned with impossible intensity. The breach convulsed as the converging bastion fields focused through that point, turning the human vessel into the center of a weapon ore, a seal beyond comprehension. The entities screamed. The breach began to close, and as it did something on the other side, noticed. Truly noticed. Tarev felt it like a hand brushing against his mind. Vast, ancient, curious, and now interested. The breach snapped shut. The light vanished. Silence fell. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. Then the instrument screamed. "Residual instability." Ilya shouted. "The containment field is failing." "What?" Drosk snapped. Tarev stared at the readings, horror dawning. "No," he whispered. "Because the bastions, those colossal constructs that had just held back something beyond comprehension, were breaking. Cracks spread across their fields. Energy levels plummeted, and deep within the newly sealed space, something pushed back, harder than before. The silence did not last. It shattered under the weight of alarms. Across every Concordium vessel, every Bayesian node, every sensor array, still struggling to agree on what reality was supposed to be. Warnings cascaded in overlapping wave systems failing, fields collapsing, geometry slipping. The breach was closed, but something on the other side had not accepted that. Containment integrity at 40% and dropping. Ilya's voice broke through the chaos. "The lattice is destabilizing from internal pressure." "Internal," Drosk snapped. "That's impossible. We sealed it." "No," Tarev said, staring at the data. "We compressed it." His mind raced, assembling the fragments. "They weren't destroyed," he continued. "They were forced into a lower dimensional stability contained within the boundary. And now they're pushing back." Drosk finished, his voice hollow. The bastions groaned. Not audibly, not in any way sound should travel through vacuum, but the effect rippled through every system connected to the network. Massive structural stress patterns lit up across Bastion 3's surface. spreading like fractures in ice. Segments that had once moved with deliberate precision now shuddered under forces they had not been designed to endure indefinitely. They were never meant to hold forever, Tarev realized. No, came a new voice. Not Vale. Not any human they had heard before. This voice was older, deeper, carried across every channel without effort, as if the very systems transmitting it had chosen to obey. They were meant to hold long enough. A new signal resolved on the main display. Another human vessel, no many. They emerged from the dark beyond the bastion ring, one after another, as if the void itself were releasing them. Larger than Vale's ship. Heavily armored, scarred in ways that suggested not single battles, but campaigns stretching across decades. Warships, real ones, each bore the same stark insignia Vale had worn, an iron symbol Tarev still could not identify. Additional human fleet entering engagement zone, reported the sensor officer, voice shaking. Numbers increasing 20, 40, 70. I'm still counting. Drosk stared. They've had a fleet this entire time. He whispered. Tarev didn't answer. Because this wasn't a fleet assembled in response to the breach. This was a fleet that had always been here, waiting. The lead ship moved forward, taking position where Vale's vessel had vanished. Its hull was darker than the bastions, less refined, more brutal, designed not for permanence, but for endurance. Weapon arrays lined its surface in layered tiers. Deep along its spine, something vast pulsed with restrained energy. The new voice spoke again. This is High Marshal Arden Cade. Sole defensive compact. Concordium forces hold your position. You are now inside the line. Drosk found his voice. Inside what line? We never crossed. You crossed it the moment you saw them. The words settled heavily. Tarev understood. You mean knowledge, he said. Cade didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The bastion fields flickered again. The sealed region bulged outward. Not breaking. Not yet. But straining. Containment failure imminent, Ilya said. Quieter now. Resigned. Cade's ship powered up. Across its hull, systems came online in sequence far more complex than anything the Concordium had fielded. Not just weapons. Not just defenses. Something integrated. Something final. All human units. Cade transmitted. Ashval Phase 2. Tarev's crest flattened against his skull. There's more, he whispered. Drosk rounded on him. What does that mean? Tarev didn't know, but he was about to. The bastions changed. Again. This time, the transformation was not structural. It was sacrificial. One by one, the massive constructs began to dim not from failure, but from deliberate shutdown. Their energy output didn't vanish. It transferred. Energy routing to central nodes, Ilya said, eyes wide. No, it's not routing, it's collapsing into what Drosk demanded. Tarev felt it before the answer came, a gravitational shift, subtle, then growing. They're forming a singularity, he said. Silence. Drosk stared at him. That would destroy everything in this system. Yes, Tarev said. Cade's voice cut in. Correct. The bridge erupted. You're insane. Drosk roared. You'll kill us all. If we don't, they will kill everyone. The sealed region bulged again. This time, something broke through. Not fully, but enough. A tendril of impossible geometry pierced the containment, slicing into real space like a blade through fabric. Where it touched, space screamed. The edge of Bastion 3 warped, sections of its armor peeling away as reality lost its grip. "They're adapting faster," Tarev said. "They're learning how to push through the compressed state." Cade didn't argue. "All Concordium vessels, you have one chance to survive. Align with our evacuation vector and engage your drives on my mark. Any ship outside the corridor will not outrun what comes next." Trask hesitated. For the first time since Tarev had met him, the Vorga Commodore looked uncertain. "You're asking us to trust you," he said. Cade's reply was immediate. "No. I'm telling you, this is the last decision your species will ever make. Choose correctly." Another rupture tore through the containment. This time, multiple fragments of the entities forced through, writhing against a failing boundary. Smaller than before, less stable, still lethal. A Concordium destroyer, caught too close, was clipped by one. It didn't vanish. It aged. Hull plating corroded in seconds. Structural supports crumbled into dust. Life signs flickered and extinguished as time itself seemed to accelerate within the ship's frame. Then it collapsed into debris that never had time to drift. Tarev's breath hitched. "They're not just breaking space," he said. "They're breaking sequence, order, causality." "Enough!" Drask snarled. He turned to his command crew. "All ships form on the human vector. We followed their escape corridor." For once, the Concordium moved as one. Ships pivoted. Drives spooled. Formation broke and reformed along the coordinates Cade transmitted. The human fleet shifted with them, creating a corridor and opening through the encroaching instability. A patho. Behind them, the Bestians continued to collapse inward, each one feeding the growing gravitational well at the center of the sealed region. The singularity took shape. Not as a natural black hole would formed from stellar collapse, but as something engineered, controlled, held in place by the last functioning Bastion systems and the core of Cade's flagship. A trap Tarev understood. "They're going to compress the entire breach," he said. "Everything inside it into a point, and that will kill it." Draski asked. Tarev hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. Cade answered for him. "It will delay them, not stop." Delay. The difference was everything. "Evacuation corridor stabilizing," Ilya reported. "We have a windows. How long?" Drusk demanded. She checked the collapsing data. "Minutes," she said. The Concordium fleet accelerated. Ships surged forward, engines screaming as they pushed beyond safe limits. Behind them, the human warships held position, maintaining the corridor, holding back the fragments of entities trying to break free. One by one, those human ships began to fall. Not destroyed in the way Concordium vessels had been, but overwhelmed. Their stabilizing fields failed, their hulls warped. Some simply ceased to be, and still they held the line. Tarev watched it all, something inside him breaking. "They knew," he said softly. "They knew this would happen." Drosk didn't respond. He didn't need to. At the rear of the formation, Cade's flagship remained. The last anchor. The singularity reached critical mass. Space around it bent inward, light curving into its growing pull. The remnants of the breach screamed as they were dragged toward it, their forms stretching, resisting, failing. Jump coordinates locked. Ilya shouted, "We're clear of the worst of the distortion execute." Drosk ordered. One by one, Concordium ships vanished into faster-than-light escape. The judicial spear was among the last. As the drive engaged, Tarev looked back. Cade's ship remained alone. The singularity consumed the last of the base. The breach collapsed into it, and for a moment, everything went still. Cade's voice came one final time. Not to the fleet, to the void. Stay. Then his ship vanished into the light. The singularity snapped shut, and the system fell silent. The Concordium fleet emerged 3 jumps away. What remained of it? Out of 20 ships, 11 survived, the rest gone. On the bridge, no one spoke. Tarev stared at the sensor readings, at the empty space where the breach had been, at the absence where an entire human defense network had sacrificed itself. They saved us, he said quietly. Drask nodded once. Yes, he said. Then, after a long pause, and they didn't want us to see why. Before anyone could respond, a new signal appeared on the board. Not from the system they had fled, from somewhere else. Deeper in Concordium space, the sensor officer turned slowly. There's another anomaly, she said. Tarev's blood ran cold. Where? Drask demanded. She gave the coordinates. A trade hub, densely populated, now registering the same impossible distortions they had just escaped. Tarev closed his eyes. They followed us, he whispered, and somewhere, far beyond the ruins of the Bastians, something learned how to open the door from the other side. The trade hub of Urex Prime died before the Concordium fleet could reach it. They saw it happen, not in real-time space, was too vast for that mercy, but in cascading transmissions, fractured across relay chains and emergency broadcasts, stitched together into a final, terrible narrative. At first, it was dismissed as system failure. Navigation beacons flickering, docking grids misaligning, local time drift causing traffic collisions. The kind of chaos that could be explained away by faulty infrastructure or sabotage. Then came the second wave. Ships arriving on schedule before they had departed. Cargo manifests updating with materials that had never been loaded. Crew logs showing conversations that had not yet occurred. The station authorities declared a Level 3 anomaly and requested assistance. They did not understand what they were seeing. Tarev did, or at least he understood enough to feel the horror of it. They're testing, he said, voice hollow. On the bridge of the battered judicial spear, the surviving command staff watched the incoming data streams in stunned silence. Testing what? Draski. Reality, Tarev replied. The final transmission from Urex Prime came 12 minutes later. A visual, feet shaking, fragmented. The camera pointed outward from one of the station's outer rings. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Stars, traffic, the distant glow of the system's primary. Then the stars bent. Not like before, not like the breach at the border. This was subtler, controlled. The light stretched, curved, then snapped back into place. And in that moment, something appeared. Small. Compared to what they had seen before, it was nothing. A fragment, a shadow of a greater whole. But it was stable. It didn't flicker. It didn't struggle. It existed. Phase stability achieved, Elia whispered. The thing moved. It didn't tear the station apart. It didn't need to. Where it passed, systems failed. Matter decayed. Time slipped. A docking ring, aged 1,000 years in seconds. Metal crumbling into dust that never had time to fall. A transport vessel elongated, its structure stretching across impossible vectors before snapping back into a shape that could not sustain itself. And then the feed ended. Rex Prime went dark. Total loss of signal, no debris, no energy signature, just gone. The bridge of the judicial spear remained silent for a long time. No one needed to say it. The thing had learned, not fully, not completely, but enough. They don't need to breach anymore, Drosk said finally. Tarev nodded. They learned how to come through on their own, he said, and we showed them how. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, because it was true. Everything the Concordium had done, every scan, every attack, every attempt to understand had given the entities more information, more patterns, more ways to adapt. Vale had warned them, "You're feeding it patterns," and they hadn't listened. A new signer appeared on the board. Human, encrypted, but not beyond the authority. Tarev accessed it before anyone could stop him. The message was simple. No visual, just text. To all surviving Concordium command structures. You have been compromised. They will follow your networks, your routes, your patterns. Do not attempt containment using your current methods. You will fail. A pause. Then we will contact you again if anything of humanity remains. The message ended. Tarev stared at it. Remains, Drosk said quietly. No one answered, because they all understood what that meant. The human fleet, the bastions, the border, gone, or nearly so, and whatever had been held back for 80 years was now loose. Across the Concordium, reports began to flood in. Not all at once, not in a coordinated wave, but in scattered, isolated incidents. A mining colony reporting temporal drift before going silent, a patrol fleet encountering non-hostile anomalies that rewrote their navigation logs into nonsense, a research station receiving signals from its own future and then ceasing to exist. Each event small, contained, but growing, spreading, learning. Tarev retreated to his quarters. For the first time since the mission began, he allowed himself to stop observing, to think. The Atari had always believed in systems, in order, in the idea that the universe, no matter how vast or complex, ultimately followed rules that could be understood. But this was something else. Something that didn't break the rules, something that rewrote them. And humanity they had known. For 80 years, they had stood at the edge of that truth and held the line, not for power, not for conquest, but for everyone else. Tarev activated the archived recording again. Mara Elling, the human official from long ago. We have petitioned, protested, negotiated. He let it play. If the stars have decided that openness is a weakness. He closed his eyes, then let history mark this night as the hour we learnt. The recording ended. Tarev opened his eyes. They didn't withdraw because they were afraid of us, he said softly. They withdrew because they were afraid of them. A chime interrupted his thoughts. Priority signals, commando level. He returned to the bridge. Drosk was already there, staring at the main display. What is it? Tarev asked. The Commodore didn't answer. He simply pointed. The star map had changed. Across multiple sectors, new anomalies were appearing. Small, faint, but unmistakable, each one marked by the same distortion signature they had seen at Virex Prime. Tarev felt his chest tighten. How many? Yeah, asked the sensor off. He swallowed. We're still counting, she said. A pause. Then, too many. The map zoomed out, further and further, until the full scale of it became clear. Not random, not isolated. A pattern. A spread, like cracks in glass, or like something mapping its way across the galaxy. They're learning how to navigate, Tarev said, and we gave them the map. Silence. Then another signal. Not human, not Concordium, not anything in their databases. It resolved slowly, painfully, as if forcing itself into a form they could perceive. Audio first, a sound like distant thunder layered over something almost curious. Then language, broken, incomplete, but forming. Observe. The bridge froze. No one moved. No one breathed. The signal continued. Adapt. Tarev felt something cold settle deep inside him, because the voice, it wasn't angry, it wasn't hostile, it was interested. Learn. The transmission paused, as if considering. Then, with growing clarity, human. Every system on the ship spiked. The word echoed across the bridge. Not translated, not interpreted, spoken directly. Where the signal cut, dead, gone. And for the first time since the nightmare had begun, Tarev understood something worse than fear, hope, not for survival, for contact, because whatever those things were, they weren't just hunting, they were searching. And now humanity was no longer there to answer. No one in the Concordium slept anymore. Not truly. Even species that required neural stasis cycles found themselves aborting rest states prematurely, dragged back into wakefulness by phantom sickness, by system alerts that resolved into nothing, by the creeping certainty that something was watching, even when instruments showed only empty space. On the judicial sphere, Tarev had begun recording everything, not just data, thoughts, impressions, patterns that could not yet be proven, because the Aitari had a doctrine older than their stuff. If the model fails, preserve the anomaly. The anomaly is the beginning of truth, and everything now was anomaly. Across the star map, the spreading distortions multiply not explosively, not in a single catastrophic wave, but with a patient, deliberate expansion that felt worse than chaos. It was controlled, measured, learning. They are not invading, Tarev said during the next command session. Drosk looked at him sharply. They've erased 3 systems. Yes, Tarev said, but not at maximum rate, not with full saturation. They're choosing where to appear. Why? Tarev hesitated. Because they're still mapping us. That answer silenced the room, because it implied something worse than destruction. It implied intention. The sensor officer spoke next, voice tight. New anomaly cluster detected near the Helios relay spine. Civilian traffic dense. We're already receiving evacuation requests. Can we reach them in time? Drosk asked. No. The word landed flat. Too late. Again. Drosk turned away, jaw clenched. Then we warned them. Full broadcast. No filtering. Commodore Talar, liaison, objected if we release unverified existential threat data across all channels. We risk panic, Drosk snapped. Yes. Good, he said. Maybe panic will make them stop behaving like this is a localized incident. No one argued further. The order went out. For the first time in Concordium history, a unified emergency transmission flooded every registered frequency, every trade band, every civilian network, unidentified extra-dimensional threat active. Do not approach anomalies. Do not investigate. Do not investigate. If you see distortion run. It was not enough. It would never be enough, because the Concordium had spent centuries teaching its citizens that knowledge was safety. And now, knowledge was a beacon. The next development came from the Ithari Combine itself, a priority signal routed directly to Tarev's personal channel, encrypted with protocols only his species used. He opened it immediately. The face that appeared was one he had hoped never to see again under such circumstances. Archlogician Cirith Val, one of the highest analytical authorities in the Combine. Tarev, Cirith said, without preamble, you are to listen carefully. We have less time than we thought. Tarev straightened instinctively. What have you found? Cirith's crest was flattened, a sign of extreme distress among it. They are not merely adapting to our physics, she said. They are adapting to our information. Tarev felt his mind lurch. Explain. We isolated a controlled anomaly fragment, Cirith continued. Minimal exposure. No external data input. Within 6 minutes, it began to stabilize. Within 12, it exhibited pattern recognition. That's consistent with what we've observed. No, she cut him off. You don't understand. It wasn't analyzing its environment. A pause. It was analyzing us. Tarev went very still. Cirith continued, her voice lowering. It responded differently, depending on what we observed. When we reduced sensor input, its behavior changed. When we altered our data interpretation models, it adapted to the models. Tarev's breath caught. They're learning from observation itself, he said. Yes, Cirith replied, and worse. She hesitated. Tarev, we believe they are using conscious perception as a reference frame. Silence, cold, absolute. That's not possible, he said. It shouldn't be, Cirith agreed. But every test confirms it. The more we observe them, the more real they become. The implication hit like a physical blow. Then the broadcasts, Tarev began, are accelerating their evolution. Cirith finished. On the bridge, Drask was watching him now, reading the change in his posture. What is it? The Commodore demanded. Tarev didn't answer immediately, because he understood now why humanity had done what it did, why they had gone silent, why they had cut themselves off, why they had hidden. They weren't just containing the entities, he said slowly. They were containing information about them. The room went quiet. Drosk's eyes widened. You're saying, the less the galaxy knew, Tarev said, the less these things could become. Cirith nodded grimly from the projection. We believe the humans discovered this early, she said, and they acted accordingly. By isolating themselves, Tarev whispered. By erasing their own data trails, Cirith added. By limiting contact, by ensuring no one studied the phenomenon at scale. Drosk let out a low, disbelieving sound. They sacrificed their entire position in the galaxy, he said, just to keep this contained. Yes, Tarev said, and we destroyed that containment in a single mission. No one spoke after that, because there was nothing to say. A new alarm cut through the silence. Incoming anomaly close. Range, Ilya shouted. Where? Drosk demanded. Her voice shook. Inside the system, Tarev's blood ran cold. "That's not possible," he said. "There was no distortion signature, no warning. Now there is." The main display shifted. Space near the fleet warped, and something emerged, not like before, not tearing through, not forcing entry. This one simply appeared, stable, small, perfectly formed within the limits of their reality. A fragment, but enough. "It skipped the breach," Tarev said. "Yes," Sereth whispered. "It doesn't need it anymore." The thing drifted closer, not attacking, observing, mirroring. Its surface, it had once shifted subtly, as though trying to resolve into something more familiar. Tarev felt a chill. "It's trying to take shape," he said. "Based on what?" Drosk asked. Tarev didn't answer, because he already knew. The entity moved again, and for a fraction of a second it resembled something. A silhouette. 2 arms. A head. Not exact. Not stable, but close enough to make every being on the bridge recoil. "It's copying us?" someone whispered. "No," Tarev said, horror dawning. "It's copying humans." The entity turned, not randomly, deliberately, toward Tarev, toward the observation blister, toward him. The systems flickered. The air felt thinner, and then it spoke. Not through comms, not through translation, directly into his mind. "Humanat?" Tarev's vision blurred. "Where did they go?" His knees buckled. Drask caught him before he fell. The Commodore barked. "What is it saying?" Tarev tried to speak. The words barely came out. "It's asking." A pause where humanity is. Silence consumed the bridge, because for the first time the truth became undeniable. This was not a war. Not yet. This was a search, and humanity, the only species that had ever understood the threat, was gone. The entity flickered, its form destabilizing slightly, as though the interaction had pushed it beyond its current limits. Then it vanished. No breach, no distortion, just gone. The system slowly stabilized. The air returned to normal. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Drask looked at Tarev. "What do we do?" he asked. Tarev stared at the empty space where the entity had been, at the spreading anomalies across the map, at the absence where humanity should have been. And for the first time since this began, he did not have an answer. "They're going to keep looking," he said. "For what?" Tarev swallowed. "For the one thing that can stop them." Drask's voice dropped. "And if they find it?" Tarev closed his eyes. "Then we'll finally understand," he said. A pause. Why humanity chose to disappear. The lights on the bridge dimmed suddenly. Not a system failure, a power redistribution. Emergency signal incoming, unknown origin. It resolved slowly, painfully, familiar, human, but distorted, broken, like something dragged back from the edge of nothing. The message began to play. "If anyone is receiving this static, we were wrong." Tarev's eyes snapped open, because the voice, it wasn't from the present. It was old, very old, and it carried something worse than fear, regret. "They are not the first." The transmission cut, And somewhere far beyond the mapped edges of known space, something else began to wake. The message did not repeat. No matter how many times they replayed the buffer, no matter how deeply ethery decryption algorithms clawed into the corrupted signal, the result remained the same. A fragment of a human voice, ancient and breaking apart under the strain of time, or something far worse. We were wrong. They are not the first. Then silence. On the bridge of the judicial spear, no one spoke for a long time, because those words changed everything. Not the threat, not the fear, but this gale. Tarev stood unmoving, his mind racing through possibilities he did not want to follow. If they're not the first, Drosk said slowly, then there were others. Tarev nodded. Yes, he said, and they failed. The implications spiraled outward like fractures in glass. If another civilization advanced enough to encounter these entities had existed before. And if they had failed, then humanity had not discovered something new. They had inherited something old, something that had already consumed at least one galaxy, or more. Trace the origin of that signal, Drosk ordered. The sensor teams were already trying. It's not coming from any known relay, Ili reported. Signal structures inconsistent. Parts of it align with pre-Concordium human encoding standards. Parts of it don't match anything. How old? Tarev asked. She hesitated. Older than any intact human network we have records for, she said. Tarev felt a chill. Older than the silence, older than the withdrawal, older than the border. Before they closed themselves off, he whispered, or before they even knew what they were dealing with, Drosk added. The thought settled heavily. Humanity had not started this war. They had walked into it, blind, just like everyone else. The next hours passed in relentless analysis. The Concordium fleet SWAT remained of them pulled back from active anomaly zones, establishing wide exclusion perimeters, while every scientific body, every intelligence network, every surviving archive was brought to bear on one question. What had humanity discovered? The answers came slowly, and they came from places no one had thought to look. Not military records, not diplomatic archive, but debris. Fragments of human infrastructure long abandoned, scattered across the outer edges of their former territory or ignored for decades because they seemed insignificant. Listening posts, data, relays, old colonies that had gone silent before the full quarantine. Tarev requested access to all of it because now every piece mattered. What he found was not a clear history. It was a pattern of erasure. Entire datasets missing, not deleted, but overwritten in ways that suggested deliberate removal beyond recovery. References to research programs that no longer had corresponding files. Mentions of events with no surviving descriptions. Humanity had not just hidden from the galaxy. They had hidden from themselves. Why would they do this? Drosk asked as Tarev presented the findings. Because knowledge was dangerous, Tarev said. Dangerous enough to erase your own history. Tarev hesitated. Then, yes, another signal came in. This one from a different Concordium sector. A research station still intact. Barely. They had isolated a fragment, like the, but smaller, weaker. And they had tried something different. The transmission was chaotic, overlapping voices, fear barely contained. We reduced observation, cut all active scans, minimal sensory input. It stabilized then. It changed. Not based on us, based on something else. What something else? A pause. Then, in a whisper, memory, the feed cut. Tarev's crest flattened. They're not just learning from observation, he said. They're learning from information itself. Drosk frowned. That's the same thing. No, Tarev said. It's worse. He turned to the main display. Observation requires presence. Information does not. Understanding dawned slowly across the room. You mean? Drosk began. Tarev nodded. They don't need to see us, he said. They just need to know about us. Silence, cold, absolute. Because that meant every record, every archive, every transmission, every story, every memory was a potential pathway. They're not spreading through space, Ilya said softly. They're spreading through knowledge. The bridge went still, because there was no defense against that. Not a physical one, not a military one. The only defense was ignorance, and ignorance was something the Concordium had spent its entire existence trying to eliminate. We need to shut it down, Drosk said suddenly. All of it? Tarev looked at him. You're suggesting we what? Collapse our networks. Erase our data. Yes. That would cripple every system in the Concordium. And not doing it will kill them. Drosk snapped. The argument erupted immediately. Communications officers protested. Strategic analysts warned of total systemic collapse. Trade liaisons spoke of famine, economic ruin, planetary isolation. Tarev said nothing, because Drosk was right, and everyone knew it. The choice wasn't between survival and collapse. It was between collapse now or extinction later. Before the decision could be made, another anomaly appeared, closer than before, inside a populated system. This time, they were ready. The system initiated full blackout protocols. No active scans, no transmissions, minimal sensory input. For a moment, it worked. The distortion stabilized, held, did not expand. Hope flickered. Then someone broke protocol. A civilian vessel. Late received the blackout order. It activated its sensors. The anomaly surged, expanded, adapted. Within seconds, the entire system was compromised. The feed cut. Gone. Hope died with it. There's no partial solution, Tarev said quietly. It's all or nothing. Drosk nodded. Then we choose nothing. The order went out across the Concordium, across every network, every system, every world. A directive unlike any in history. Shut IT down. All of it. Communications fell silent. Data streams collapsed. Trade networks vanished. The great web of interstellar civilization built over millennia went dark. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy stopped talking. And for a moment, the spread slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Enough to breathe. Enough to think. Enough to realize something else. Something worse. They're still searching, Tarev said. Drosk looked at him. For what? Tarev didn't answer immediately, because he was thinking about the question the entity had asked. Human. Where? They're not interested in us, he said finally. They're interested in them. Why? Tarev met his gaze because humanity figured something out. Silence. And whatever it is, Tarev continued, it's the only thing that can stop them. A new signal appeared. Weak, faint, human, but not from the network. Not from any known relay. From deep space, unmapped, unreachable, it resolves slowly. A single coordinate and a message. Short, direct. If you want to live, come find us. Drosk stared at it. You think it's real? Tarev didn't hesitate. Yes. Why? Tarev's eyes hardened. Because they're still looking for humanity. A pause, and that means humanity is still out there. The coordinate pulsed on the display. Far beyond known space, far beyond safety, into the dark. Drosk turned to his crew. Set a course, he said. No one objected, because there was nothing left to lose. As the judicial spear turned toward the unknown, Tarev felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not hope, something else. Understanding. Humanity had not just fought the enemy. They had hidden from it, run from it, lured it away. And now, perhaps they were waiting for someone to follow. The stars stretched as the ship entered jump, and far behind them in the silent, darkened galaxy, the anomalies paused, as if listening, as if noticing, as if they had just been given a new direction. The stars ahead did not belong to any map. Even before the judicial spear dropped out of jump, Tarev knew they had crossed a boundary no Concordium vessel had ever recorded. Navigation systems struggled to reconcile their position. Reference constellations failed. Even the background radiation, the quiet, ever-present whisper of the universe, felt different, old. Exit in 3, 2, 1. Reality snapped back. The ship emerged into darkness. Not the natural darkness of interstellar space, scattered with distant starlight. This was something deeper, a region where stars existed but dimmed, as if seen through layers of ancient dust or deliberate obstruction. Sensor arrays strained, returning fragmented data, incomplete readings, shadows where light should have been clear. "Where are we?" Drosk asked. Tarev stared at the display. "I don't think it applies anymore," he said quietly. Ahead, something waited. At first, it appeared as debris, a vast field of shattered structures, drifting in slow orbit around a dim, dying star. Fragments of metal, broken hulls, skeletal frameworks, remnants of ships far larger than anything the Concordium had ever built. Not human, not Concordium, not anything in their records. Multiple unknown vessel signatures, Ilya whispered. A graveyard, Tarev's breath caught. "No," he said, "not a graveyard." A pause. A battlefield? Because these weren't ruins left by time. They were destroyed. Violently, systematically, and at the center of it all, a single structure remained intact. A stisha, massive, ancient. Its design unlike anything Tarev had ever seen, layered, geometric, almost organic in the way its architecture curved and intersected. Sections of it flickered, as though parts of its existence were only partially anchored to reality. And yet it was stable. Barely. The signal pulsed again. "If you want to live, come find us." Drosk exhaled slowly. "That's our destination." No one disagreed. As the judicial spear advanced, something else became clear. They were not alone. Human ships surrounded the station. Not fleets, not armies. Survivors. Dozens of vessels, all damaged, all worn, all bearing the same scars of impossible conflict. Some drifted lifelessly. Others maintained minimal power. A few, very few still, moved with purpose. "This is what's left of them," Tarev said. Drosk's voice was low. "They ran," Tarev shook his head. "No," he said. They lured. The realization settled heavily. Humanity hadn't just fought the entities. They had drawn them away, out of the galaxy, out into the dark. Here, to this place, the judicial spear received Okin clearance. No formal greeting, no ceremony. Just coordinates. As they approached, Tarev felt something else. A pressure. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. "They're here too," he said. Drosk's grip tightened on the command rail. "How far?" Tarev closed his eyes briefly, focusing on the sensation. "Closer than we want," he said. The ship docked. The airlock opened, and for the first time since the beginning of the nightmare, they stepped into human space. The station was dying. That was the first thing Tarev understood. Not failing, not damaged, dying. Its systems were ancient, patched together from technologies spanning centuries. Some sections were pristine, others were barely functional. Entire corridors were sealed, abandoned, or simply gone. And everywhere, humans, fewer than Tarev expected, more than he feared. They moved with quiet purpose, their expressions calm in a way that was not peace, but acceptance. They had been here a long time, waiting. A figure approached, old, older than any human Tarev had seen. Her hair completely white, her face lined not just with age, but with experience that no species should have to carry, but her eyes sharp, alive. She stopped in front of them. "Took you long enough," she said. Drosk stepped forward. "You sent the signal?" She nodded. "Name's Elling," she said. Tarev froze. The recording. Mara Elling. "It couldn't be." She saw his reaction. "Not the one you heard," she said. "That was my grandmother." A pause. "She was there when it started." Tarev swallowed. "Then you know what they are." Elling's expression didn't change. "Yes," she said. "Tell us," Drosk demanded. Elling looked past them, out into the dark beyond the station. "They're not invaders," she said. Silence. Tarev felt his mind resist the words. "Then what are they?" he asked. Elling turned back to him. "They're what's left," she said. "Of what?" Drosk pressed. Elling's gaze hardened. "Of a civilization that solved everything." The words hung in the air. Tarev frowned. "I don't understand." They reached the end. Elling continued. "No scarcity, no conflict, no unknowns." They mapped reality completely. A pause, and then they tried to go further. Tarev's breath caught. "Beyond reality," he said. Elling nodded. "They broke it," she said. Silence. Cold. Absolute. "They didn't just discover something outside the universe," she continued. "They became it." Draski stared. "You're saying those things are what's left of them," Elling said. "Fragments of a species that outgrew existence itself." Tarev felt something inside him crack. "They're not trying to destroy us," he whispered. "No," Elling said. "They're trying to understand us." "Why?" Drosk demanded. Elling's answer was simple. "Because we're still inside the system they broke." The weight of it was unbearable. "They were learning how to exist here again," Tarev said. "Yes. And every time we observe them, they learn faster." Silence. Then how do we stop them?" Drosk asked. Elling smiled faintly. A sad smile. "You don't," she said. Drosk's expression hardened. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one," Elling replied. She gestured around them. This station, this place, this is the last thing we built. What is it? Tarev asked. Elling's voice dropped. A blind spot. Understanding hit instantly. You removed yourselves, Tarev said. From observation. Elling nodded. No signals, no data, no presence beyond this point. To them, we don't exist here. And that protects you, Drosk said. For now, Tarev stepped forward. Then why call us here? He asked. Elling met his gaze. Because you already made the same mistake we did, she said. You saw them. You studied them. You told your entire galaxy about them. A pause. They're coming for you now. Silence. Heavy. Final. Drusk's voice was low. Then what do we do? Elling looked at both of them, and for the first time there was something like hope in her eyes. You do what we did, she said. You disappear. The words settled like a verdict. Shut it all down, she continued. Erased everything, every record, every network, every memory you can. Make yourselves small. Make yourselves invisible. Tarev's mind reeled. That would end Concordium, he said. Elling nodded. Yes. A pause. But it might save your species. Drosk clenched his fists. And if we don't? Elling didn't hesitate. Then they'll find you, she said. And when they do, her voice soft, they won't mean to hurt you. The station lights flickered. A distant tremor ran through the structure. Tarev felt it again. The pressure. Closer. Now. Much closer. Elling looked toward the void. They're almost here, she said. Drosk turned to Tarev. For the first time, not as a commander, not as an ally, but as someone standing at the edge of extinction. What do we choose? He asked. Tarev looked out into the darkness, at the graveyard of civilizations that had come before, at the survivors, who had given up everything to hold the line, at the truth humanity had learned too late. He thought of of its worlds, its people, its endless hunger for knowledge, and the price of that knowledge. Slowly he spoke. We forget, he said. Silence. Then Draskinadad, and somewhere in the dark, the entities arrived, not with violence, not with force, but with presence, watching, learning, waiting. And for the last time humanity chose silence. The galaxy went quiet. No signals. No networks. No record. Civilizations vanished not, destroyed, but hidden. Knowledge erased. History forgotten. And in the vast, endless dark, something searched. For a long time. For a very long time. But it never found them. And somewhere, in a place that did not exist, a fragment of something vast paused. Confused. Curious. Curious. And for the first time,